Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Tom Conway-Gordon. Tom, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Lewis. It's my pleasure too. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the show. I'm excited for what our conversation is going to cover.
I'm excited to get into it too, as we've obviously met in person and had a very nice chat, which I'm looking forward to. But before we get into that, in your own words, what makes you a man?
It's a good question. I've obviously thought about this a fair bit. As I was writing a sort of paragraphs of what makes me a man, it could be this, it could be that, it could be all these other things, and I've sort of bubbled it down, as I think, to sort of maybe 5 points. I think first and foremost, it's about integrity. Being a man of my word, saying what I'm going to say, doing what I say I'm going to do, and being that sort of integrity sort of leads to sort of consistency. So that means that when I show up in people's lives or I interact with people, they get the same sort of Tom, crazy as whoever that Tom is that day, but there is consistency and integrity within that. I think the second point is a sort of resilience. As I was just mentioning before we started, it was my birthday the other day, and you kind of think how I, just take those opportunities to look back at how far we've come and how far I've still got to live, as it were, or hope to live. And so I think about how all the challenges I faced, and in many different ways, in myriad, and professional, personal, mental, obviously why we're talking today, and those sort of things. So I sort of look at the resilience of that. That's a key pillar of who I am. I think it's important to talk about the love and respect for women I have as a man in this world, not just a man's world, but the world we live in is obviously both sexes, and I think it's an important role of a man to, or as me, it's certainly. I grew up in a kind of a house with 3 women, my mother and 2 younger sisters, so very much involved in the sort of the fairer sex, so to speak. So I think a man in this world certainly has to have that love in many different ways, but certainly respect and awareness and respect for women in that regard. I think also the curiosity. I think curiosity for me is a very important aspect of who I am, because I think people who generally aren't curious, I think they're generally closed, and therefore it's hard for them to sort of explore and understand the myriad of amazing things in this world, whatever they might be. And with that curiosity, I think, I'm always, when people talk about what their passions are, whether they might be what we typically might consider boring things like stamp collecting or butterfly catching or whatever it might be, or the Indian carpets, whatever it might be. I think I always find it curious to understand and kind of gently probe as to what those people what they're interested in, what gets their passion about, because I want to know not necessarily about that and trying to become an Indian carpet expert myself, or a Turkish carpet, or whatever it might be, that sort of stuff myself, but people really light up when they talk about their passions, and you can really understand and connect with people when they're being kind of barriers come down and they can be really honest and open about all that sort of stuff. So I think that's very important too. And then lastly, I think about just trying to be a good person. I think, kind of this sounds self-aggrandizing, but sort of kind of paying respect to the generations of Conway-Gordons, and on my mother's side too, who have come before me, and just try and be a good person, try and add positivity to the world, positivity to people on a one-to-one basis, that sort of stuff. Try not to be a dickhead in any way, shape, or form in that regard. But yeah, just try and be as positive as possible, but genuinely so, not sort of people pleasing and that sort of thing. So a rather long-winded answer, but that sort of encapsulates me in a nutshell, I suppose.
No, we love a long-winded answer here, especially for that question. That's the whole point of it. But yeah, the curiosity, I really like that. Why is the question I love asking. I think it's toddlers always ask it. Why?
Yeah. Why are we doing this? Exactly.
Yeah. We forget to ask it later in life, and I think it's really important as men to keep questioning why, and what makes you a man. And yeah, it's nice. So yeah, I really like the curiosity. I've not actually heard that one before, which is good. So yeah, Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you reached out to me? Essentially, what's your story? What sort of brought you into the sort of men's well-being and mental health space?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Lewis. I suppose it all kind of goes back. I've had various issues with mental illness, mental ill health challenges. I suppose to kind of paint me a bit more of a picture about my experience and that resilience I talked about earlier. I suppose I have. I suppose the first big bout of mental illness and feeling generally a bit crap was probably in my late teens. I'd been left behind in different ways throughout my sort of teen years. I had to do the final year of secondary school, no, kind of not primary school, but that sort of 12, 13, 14. I had to do that. I was too old for the year, so I had got left behind when all my mates went off to secondary school and obviously went off to boarding school, etc. So I got left behind there, which was a bit of okay. I'm dyslexic, so back then I was thick, or supposedly judged as being thick or not working hard enough or not diligent enough and all those sort of things. Whereas now dyslexia is a superpower and all this very positive stuff around it, which I absolutely resonate with because I can speak from experience and personality. So I was dyslexic then, so I sort of failed all my A levels and then. I chose the wrong A levels. I should have done languages. I just chose science, and I, failed all of those. And all my mates went off to university, so I sort of got left behind then. And then I suppose the third and the triple of the whammy, I suppose, was my parents split, and my dad left and went off to America and sort of abandoned us in a way. And so I got left behind by him too. So I kind of left behind feeling a bit sort of late 19, probably about 19, 20, 21, that's those sort of years. I just felt really low. I just thought, what's my purpose here? What's going on? I felt miserable. I was like, all my mates have left me. I'm too stupid to get into university, or so I was led to believe. And so, and it's like, well, this, that, and the other. So that was the first sort of period of real blues. And then I suppose in the sort of but I went to live in the Middle East. About 2008, I spent the best part of my 30s there, and there was a really tricky time probably about halfway through that, I suppose. I got very depressed. I was in a sadly unhealthy relationship. Had an awful boss. I had an awful stuff at work. I was constantly anxious at work, and I was in a sort of slightly codependent relationship with my girlfriend at the time. And that relationship brought up all the sort of coping mechanisms that my other parents had used to sort of deal with the fact my father left, which invariably involved alcohol. So I kind of was anxious about going into work and terrified about every time my boss came out of his office, he was going to come and give me a hard time. And then I'd kind of go home into a sort of a loving relationship, but that was sort of wasn't so loving, became very difficult. And I just, all of the stuff that happened 15 years before, it sort of compounded in a compound interest and suddenly all came into this huge, great whammy in about sort of 2012 when I really hit kind of rock bottom, I suppose, and I was very suicidal. I contemplated throwing myself down in Dubai, there are lots of very tall skyscrapers. I remember looking down the stairwell of one and really thinking, I'm going to throw myself off there. And then I suddenly thought, hold on a sec, pulled myself back, as it were. So I've got a lot, that's the sort of experience in terms of having been through that and then building myself out of that through 2013, 14, 15, 2015 this is, and using the learnings I've got from that. I was obviously I was on antidepressants and the journey with those and what that taught me and cognitive behavioral therapy and all these sort of things that sort of really helped me learn about myself and all of these awful things that had happened. Well, they just happened. That was my life and how I learned to deal with them and handle them. So I came back from Dubai in about this time in 2016, so almost 8 years ago now. And there was a huge groundswell in the UK about the whole discussion of mental health. The princes, Prince Harry and William, when they were getting on with Catherine and their Heads Together campaign was big. It was front page news sort of thing, and mental health was suddenly a topic we could talk about. And so I thought, oh, hold on, okay, I'm back in the UK. I'm trying to figure out who I am, having been away for so long. There's a bit of a turbulent re-entry, as anyone listening to this who's lived abroad and comes back to London or the UK or back home will understand. It's suddenly a bit like, whoa, who am I? I'm not Dubai Tom anymore because I'm not in Dubai or that sort of thing. So I came back and found. So I thought, well, I've got I was figuring out rebuilding my career, that sort of stuff. And I thought there was this groundswell in this conversation around all of the mental health, mental illness, and the fact that struck me that most men my age and our age, I suppose, is the killer of them is themselves. So I thought, well, hold on a sec. I've got lots of stories to tell about this. And I like writing. I work in public relations and communications and reputation. So I'm luckily quite good with my fingers from a word writing perspective, I hasten to add. So I started writing my stories. And that sort of there was some momentum that got picked up. I wrote a big piece which I published on Medium about antidepressants and me, the drugs did work. Made based on the fact that there was big articles in the national press about GPs handing out SSRIs like sweeties, just you'll fine, just take some of these and you'll be fine. Take 2 of these and call me in the morning, sort of thing. And so that was where that was that initial sort of grounds, that first stake in the ground in terms of me becoming a mental health advocate. And I then I was being published in a book called The Silent Scream. Maria Alfieri wrote that, talking about my story there. I was did a film with a charity called Mind, talking about suicide and that sort of stuff. And so, I just thought, if one person reads my stories or sees these films or whatever it is, and it helps them, then it's well worth doing. So kind of long-winded question coming back to you, Lewis, is the fact that, I've been on a few podcasts here and there. I've given kind of motivational speeches talking about my experience. I gave one in Dubai, actually, towards the tail end of Dubai. So I thought, well, I just want to keep doing this because it's authentic to me. I enjoyed doing it. Now, as I said, that's that sort of the rising tide lifted all boats in terms of the mental health conversation, certainly from a male perspective. I looked around who are the top podcasts to talk about, and I looked, it's TRUUMAN #1. I thought, Lewis Hackney, and then we connected, and then you said you were coming to London on LinkedIn. I was like, right, here's my opportunity, and here we are.
Yeah, amazing. So there's a lot to dissect in there, yes. And I think one of the sort of the main things I want to sort of look at right at the beginning is what is it that you think leads to men having sort of codependent relationships? I think that seems to be one of the sort of major issues that you bring up. You talk about the story of how you got there, but I hear it time and time again. It's the relation that the man's world is their relationship. Why do you think so many men fall into that space?
It's a tough one. I mean, the first word that springs to mind, it's going to sound really judgmental, is sort of weakness. And I don't mean weakness in that men have become weak now, but I think it's a bit of sort of, it's not understanding themselves enough to see that, to be sort of having the esteem and maybe the sort of being forthright and that sort of integrity I talked about earlier, and knowing who they really are and what they stand for. I think that's really important. I think men from my perspective, have really understood what makes me tick in the good times and the bad, what triggers me, that sort of stuff. And I think that the age-old kind of ideology that's, men brings the security for women, and that's ultimately why women choose men partners. I think that can be sort of bewildering in a point, and men not feeling good enough. And then start to seek, when you don't feel good enough, and I say this from experience, you seek validation externally. And so if you're, with a wife, a girlfriend, a partner, whatever it might be, that's the person you're spending most of your time with. When you're not in the office, whatever it might be, or might be working from home, whatever it might be. So that naturally becomes, you seek your validation through her or them. And I think what can happen, is that you become so kind of reliant, because they're reliant on getting the crumbs or the validation or making happy or making a smile, that sort of stuff, because you're not quite in a position to feel strong enough to stand up and say what I'm going to say, and you'll sort of become a bit fearful, perhaps, of losing that sort of connection. Perhaps I think that could be it. I think I certainly was. It comes from sort of people pleasing. I think, speaking from experience, and I think I was quite well tuned to sort of not listen to myself as a child, but more about what's going on around me. Who do I have to be to make those people happy? And I think that can be an element of that too. I think that sort of, by not being resilient or strong or understood oneself enough, I think that can sort of, you can become your be all and end all for who you are and what makes you happy exists entirely in the happiness and mood of someone else.
So, like, there's obviously crazy statistics around men and their lack of friends. It's something crazy, like 90% of men don't say they have a close friend, which obviously then leads into this this codependency of their partner, and a lot of their friends tend to be their partners in a roundabout way, which is obviously not very healthy. What do you think men can do to start to move away from that? Like you say, that finding yourself, and you've obviously got experience in sort of getting out of this. So what are sort of the first steps to start to build a life that isn't codependent?
Well, I think all great decisions and when great sort of moments certainly in my life have been about getting out a piece of paper and writing stuff down. I talk about this. I've talked about this a lot, and getting stuff out of your head and writing this down. So creating a sort of blank piece of paper to understand where I sit now. Where am I? What's about my life? What does it look like? Am I happy? Am I this? What do I do? What am I eating? Whatever am I doing? What am I spending my money on? Am I earning enough money? All that sort of stuff. I think that sort of audit is always a very good start as a sort of, right, I've had enough of this. Right, I'm going to close this chapter. I want to start writing a new one. But first, let's see where I am and establish the sort of baseline of where I am. Where am I right now? I think that's an important thing to do, because then you kind of your clarity. Okay, this is who I am. You've held the mirror up. This is it. And some of those questions you ask yourself are going to be difficult. And I would encourage listeners to ask the difficult questions about oneself, to shine a light in the dark corners. I mean, we're all afraid of the dark inside ourselves, and I think it's important to really figure it out. But anyway, so I think so that's kind of get a sit rep of where we are now. But I think also that will also help you kind of, I think in my experience, tune into what you like doing. What do you like doing? As an individual, what do you like doing? Is it reading books? Is it painting? Is it going for a walk? Is it Indian rug collecting? Whatever it might be. I think those sort of things, what you're passionate about. And I think even if some people say, well, I'm not really passionate about this. I'm not really passionate about anything. Well, the secret to fun discovering passions is to go and be curious and actually go and think, well, maybe I might be interested in natural history. Well, I'm going to go to London, go to the Natural History Museum and look at dinosaurs. And if you walk out of there warm, great, or excited, cool. But if you're like, no, it's dinosaurs isn't for me, then at least you've gone out there and you've given yourself the validation. You've got the esteem to say, I'm going to go and do something. Check it out. I mean, whether it's Natural History Museum or whether it's the library or whether it's the gym or whether it's the art, still life class, whatever it might be. But the thing is, you've got to take action. Action is the most important thing here. And I think even if that sort of action doesn't necessarily lead, it might be a dead end, but the fact that you've gone and explored something that you might consider that you like doing, which I'm sure, we all like doing things, whether it's movies or films, whatever. I mean, it's very rare that you come across someone that is actually human, there isn't something that, makes their eyes light up. I think that's certainly a path I chose and a sort of path I recommended. I think exercise for me was absolutely essential. I mean, I got really into CrossFit when I was in Dubai, which was a very hard exercise. I've always been pretty fit. I always know my way around a gym and I played tennis, this sort of stuff. But I got into something where I got to get so tired and so like, I haven't got time to think about how crap I feel. I haven't got time to think about, oh God, my life's so bad. Oh, my bosses are so-and-so, or my girlfriend's miserable, whatever. I think I found that very, very therapeutic, but that's just me. And physical exercise has always been very important. But going back to the sort of tactics and strategies men can take, I think it's about taking ownership of one's life to a certain extent. And while that sounds quite sort of massive and highfalutin, it's a very important thing to do. And that starts with that sort of self-discovery, taking oneself away from your home, your relationship. Not sort of saying dump your girlfriend, but I'm saying just take yourself away into a space that's entirely yours. That might be take yourself for a weekend away or whatever it might be, but really give yourself the time and the effort and the investment. You might want to go to a nice hotel, whatever it might be, or who knows, whatever it might be. And that's up to the individual, obviously. But give yourself that room, that space, that time to really figure out what sort of, what might you like to do with your life, or what might you like to spend a bit of time doing. I'm not saying you're going to change your whole life in, from one piece of paper, though it does happen. I think I think that's certainly a tactic, is just check in with yourself. Where do we stand now? What do I like? What's good? I mean, from a professional perspective, I always talk about SWOTs, which are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Doing the SWOT analysis of any major decision I make. But then you could do that about your life. What are the strengths? Well, I've got this. I've got a lovely girlfriend. I've might earn good money. I've got 3 kids, whatever it might be. And then you look at the individuals. What weaknesses? Well, I'm not spending enough time doing fun. Well, the opportunities. Well, I'll spend more time doing fun things. What is the threat of that? How I tell that to my girlfriend and say, well, actually, I'm going to be playing golf every Saturday for however long it might be, or I need every Thursday night because there's a still life thing, whatever it might be. But I think just kind of creating that self-awareness and that naturally breeds confidence, because you're tuning into yourself to figure out, oh yeah, I've forgotten about that. Or actually, I really should do that. I mean, we always say we shoulda, woulda, coulda, and those excuses then become regrets. So I think that's an important, valuable, from my perspective anyway, valuable step.
Yeah, whenever I do this podcast, I'm always cautious when we start getting into the depth of it. Just a disclaimer: don't quit your job, don't dump your wife, don't leave your kids.
No.
Take it slowly, build from there.
Yes, I just on that, I think a mantra of mine is always patience is always rewarded. And so I think, doing anything rash is a very bad idea. That's reaction. And again, putting my professional hat on, we don't react to things. We want to learn how to respond. And how you create your response to where you're feeling now, your stuff, meds, whatever it might be, is a strategic and longer path, rather than oh God, turn my world upside down and that'll solve it, because all that's doing is making the controllables you had very uncontrollable.
Yeah, for sure. It's about definitely balance and respond over. I like that. That's quite a nice way of putting it. There's one thing that's sort of the elephant in the room here, right? Which is this is vulnerable. This is vulnerability. Okay. And you talked about coming back to the UK in 2016, and only just then was mental health becoming acceptable. That was 8 years ago. And I would argue that it's only maybe just creeping into acceptable for men. So talk to me both from a story point of view and your opinion on it. How do you get from I'm in the shit, I know I'm in the shit, I need to do something about it, to taking action, to doing something? In your case, you talk about therapy, and then you talk about this other sort of task that you've sort of created. But how do you make that step, and then what does that look like after?
I think it's ultimately about the relationship you want with yourself. And the person, I always use this phrase that you're going to there's one person you're going to wake up with forever, regardless who's lying next to you, whether it's a hot body, a dog, whatever it might, cat, whatever it might be, and that's yourself. And if you're not being really honest with yourself and having that difficult conversations with yourself, then what's it really for? What's it all about? Who do you? What are you kind of giving? You're giving a sort of false impersonation, a false presentation of who you think you should be based on the presence of other minds. I think that's you owe it to yourself, guys. I think that's first and foremost. And then excuse my French, but fuck what everyone else thinks. It's about you. It's you versus you. It's that sort of looking in the mirror, not you versus you in the sort of really aggressive turbo, me versus me. But you take that and interpret that, and you versus you how you want. I really encourage you to do that, and whatever that means to you. It's not about what other people think. And I think in this world we live in now, it's so much about what everyone thinks. It's so much about the optics. There's so much weight put on who's doing what and who's succeeding, who's got more money and who's got more Instagram followers and who's got the best holiday and who's got the nicest car and all this material bullshit. That it's fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm on Instagram and I post pictures of me looking cool, or that's how I like to think. Sure, but I also know that comes from a place of real solidity in who I am. And if someone goes, "No, you're a dickhead for doing that," I don't give a shit. I don't care. I really don't care. But it's taken a long time to build that resilience. But I would say that it's about you for you. Who do you want to be? And I often talk about this kind of concept of future Tom. So I don't do everything I do for the benefits I'm going to get in tomorrow, in an hour, in 10 years. But I think that having that sort of perspective and being able to see into the future of me is, in a way, gives me sort of, not urgency, but that perspective and sort of focus in terms of how I want to live my life right now.
Yeah. I always say that this is a privileged position to be in. This is a conversation that we're having right now that I feel is quite privileged
Okay.
in regards to we're able to have these thoughts. What would you say to people that might be in situations that say, well, you can do this. You're able to think about yourself. I've got 3 kids, a wife, and I've got to work 12 hours digging a hole. Obviously, that's not a professional job, but
Sure.
you know,
Okay. Yeah.
hard labor essentially.
What's my views on that? I mean, there's 24 hours in a day, and we've all got time. I'm not saying you're going to suddenly be able to pick up a 6-hour hobby if you're doing a 12-hour day, but that time to even just, carve out an hour to do that sort of analysis and figure out, check in with oneself or speak to someone or find out how best to do that. I mean, there's, as you said, the mental health landscape, as you said, is finally becoming a bit more out there and a bit more available. I mean, there's myriad resources, but I think that you have to take the time. It's not, nothing's going to come in life and going to land on your plate. You're very lucky if it does. But when it comes to this sort of thing, there has to be that action. You can't kind of say, well, I'm too busy. I've got 5 screaming kids and all this sort of stuff. Well, that's fact. That's, that's stuff. But you've also got to take a firm grip on, if you're miserable, if you're kind of thinking my life is really miserable, I'm going to kill myself next year. And I'm not saying that in any sort of facetious manner, but that's what can happen. It's just like, I'm just stuck in a thing. Then you have to snap out of that. That has to be the case. You have to be serious with yourself. You have to get a firm grip on who you are. And that isn't that, that's, my posh accent sounds very privileged indeed, but that's what you have to do, in my experience. And I think, yes, your kids will be there, your wife will be there, that 12-hour job will be there. But if you're stuck in a rut, the only person that's really going to get you out of that is you. And that's going to be up to you and how you choose. Even that first step is the most important, because it says, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to be somewhere else, whether that's up, down, left, right, whatever it might be. But that has to come from within, and you have to find that. It might take 6 months to build up the courage or whatever it might be to actually go, you know what, missus, I'm going to take an hour off. You look after the kids, we get the aunt to look after, whatever it might be. And then just to take that time to do it. And I think the guts that come from that, the guts that are required to do that come from that sort of understanding, the sort of actually, I'm miserable, this has to stop. For me, I don't want to live my life like this. And you reach that sort of that rock bottom moment, not necessarily through drugs or alcohol, but that moment where you think, I've had enough. That's it. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to do something. And that's where the sort of the downward dip, as it were, plateaus. And then every action you take, you're going to start sort of climbing out of that malaise or that situation or that mental cycle or whatever it might be that you're finding yourself in that's making you miserable. Because, humans are incredible things. We don't want to. Our life we're not designed to sit around feeling miserable for ourselves.
Yeah, we're dopamine junkies at the end of the day, no matter what we do. I think there's also that level of realism, and you're not going to go from A to Z. You've got to go from A to B, whatever that is in your situation, right? It's not a case of just jumping to perfect.
I think that's it. That's the sort of the patience bit. That's where the patience comes in. I mean, it's taken me probably 20 years to be a sort of, confident, solid in who I am. And believe me, I still get insecure about things and I feel vulnerable. I'm not sort of Mr. Perfect, Mr. Instagram that's suddenly bulletproof and amazing and all these sort of things. No, for sure. But the understanding is that having been through that and taken that when those thoughts and that sort of, I talk about the whip hand for me is, I'll give myself a harder time, much better than anyone else can, because that's how I've been. And sometimes you get into those sort of moments where you're just really giving myself a hard time. And I just think, no, I'm not going to, I've learned to catch those sort of thoughts. But that's taken, as I said, 20 years to do that. And everyone's journey is different. There's not, as you said, there's never going to be a wave the magic wand and wake up and you feel great. I mean, you can do that with, alcohol and, that sort of dopamine, as you talked about. You can dump a load of dopamine. You can take all sorts of fancy drugs that'll make you feel amazing, but you'll kind of come back down again. But no, it's the joy is actually in the journey of, as you start to take action for yourself, and the sort of, it's very subliminal at first, but you start, it works. That step, that's that A to Z. It's sort of A to A and a half almost, and before you even get to B. But I think that those are the things that once you start that sort of, create that kind of momentum, get that sort of thing going, you think, oh yeah, this is really good. Even if it's just spending 5 minutes of a morning on a piece of paper or a journaling book, just writing stuff down. How do I feel today? What do I want to do? That's 5 minutes. We've all got 5 minutes. And then you start to think, because you're writing things down, you can see them. Then you think, oh, actually, that's a bit of a problem. I don't like doing that, or I want to address this. But as you said, there's really no quick fixes in life. But ultimately, the reward as you start to come out of that is going to be so worth it that you're going to think, well done, Tom, James, Bob, whoever it might be, for doing that. And that's where the sort of the wave of, not you say euphoria, but the benefits of that internally, and that sort of fills up your esteem bucket and your confidence bucket, and then you're suddenly like, okay, great, this is working. What else can I do for me?
Yeah, for sure. I think touching on that, like coming out of it, in regards to yourself, what came first? Was it the therapy, or was it being offered antidepressants? What was the first?
Well, I was in Dubai, so it was sort of, I went to the doctor. Generally, the great suggestion is, which I concur with, is go see your GP, go see your doctor and say, look, this is how I'm feeling, and see what he says. I was in Dubai at the time, and I went to the doctor, and I remember his name very clearly. And I said, look, mate, I'm in a world of pain, this, that, and the other. And he said, right, go and see this person. First of all, he said, yeah, here's some drugs. Here, take these and take this vitamin with them to, make sure they work. I was like, great, that's a sort of, I'm taking control of how I feel by, okay, it was medicine, but every morning I had to get up and take one and that sort of thing. So that was the first thing. That was just to kind of take me away from those real lows. And then it was like, right, I really want to get to the bottom of this. That gave me the sort of security in my mind, so I wouldn't go super low and consider throwing myself down some huge flight of stairs over a balcony. And that gave me the sort of room to then start exploring talking therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that sort of stuff, and starting to understand and really be curious about what were the triggers and what was the mindset, what was the sort of subconscious that made me go to very low places when things in my life happened, like my boss shouted at me or my girlfriend was whatever, negative. Well, what happened? What when I got triggered? What causes the trigger, and what was the conversation within myself that made me feel so awful? And God, I just can't do this anymore. Became my own worst enemy. And so it was the drugs first, simple as that. The UAE is quite medically, I won't say aggressive, but they're quite keen to, pump you full of surgeries, drugs, things rather than more softer stuff. But this is again 10, 12 years ago. So I imagine it's advanced as it has in the UK, but in answer to your question, it was, to get the drugs to stop those catastrophic lows when I would just be like, oh God, make it end now.
Yeah, I think in the UK it's still quite common. I've done a podcast with an ex-GP who said that was what he was prescribing, was just straight away to antidepressants, and he also himself suffered and found his own way out and didn't take it, and now sort of really pushes trying to go the other way and sort of not last resort for drugs, I guess, and antidepressants. Is that where you felt you were?
I felt like that. I think just think about what you just said, Lewis. I think that the antidepressants were a way of it was sort of they were putting a Band-Aid on it, but they weren't going to solve all the issues that came from it. But what I used my antidepressant journey was, I used them as the platform to give me the understanding about myself. And once I understood myself and how my mind works and processed all the stuff that happened, being left behind and stuff I mentioned earlier, and alcoholism and stuff. Then I was like, okay, I'm strong enough. I don't want to have to rely on these anymore. I'd sort of elevated. I'd taken myself, I'd climbed those steps we talked about earlier, away from it. And then I was like, well, I don't want these drugs anymore because they make me feel numb. which was great when I first started taking them. But, after 2 years of therapy and really sort of forensic analysis of myself and all the things that happened and how my mind works and how I think and all this sort of stuff, I think, I wanted to leave them behind. And so I don't poo-poo the idea of, GPs giving people drugs, because it worked for me. Simple as that. As I said in an article I wrote, the drugs did work. But they were a way of help giving me the room to do the work, to understand. And then I could actually, I don't need these anymore. Cut off the sort of stabilizers, as it were.
Yeah, stabilizers is a great analogy. But I think you've really got to be in that mindset, though, right? Because there are people that just live on these things forever. Right?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I mean, I'm not saying that how I live my life and what I've led to is the route for everyone. I'm just being authentic and talking about what's worked for me. But I think, no, indeed, I think that I've got people I know that are on those and will take them to in perpetuity. They work for them, and everyone's brain chemistry is obviously very different. But from a personal experience, it was, I remember I wasn't able to, I didn't really laugh for about 2 years. I didn't really cry for 2 years either. I was in that sort of nothing too high, nothing too low, which was great because when it first started. But eventually, I was like, I like to think I enjoy laughter. I think that's quite funny sometimes, occasionally, and I like laughing, giggling, but also I like to do. I've always been the sort of person that will shed a tear in sad films. I like being able to cry. And I don't think there's any shame in that. I'm not sort of guffawing when Bambi died, but that single tear of breaking down, those sort of things. But being able to have that really frog in the throat and being able to cry, and I wasn't able to cry for 2 years on these antidepressants, and I missed that. And I remember going to the cinema as I slowly came off them, and I started to feel strong again. And I remember for some reason, it's going to sound really corny, but it was at the end of the one of the Batman Superman films where Superman gets killed or whatever, supposedly, and then he rises up, whatever it is. But I remember feeling a hot tear rolling down my cheek. I was in some mall in Dubai. I remember a hot tear rolled down my cheek. I thought, oh, thank God I could cry again. It was a very seminal moment. Jesus, that sounds.
Well, I mean, that again, you talk about wanting to be happy. I think humans just want to experience an array of emotions, right? We don't want to be numb to the world as what it is, for sure, right?
We want to feel. We want to feel. 100%.
So with the CBT, is that something that you still do now? How does that work? Do you still have the therapy, or is it?
No, not really. I mean, the woman I spoke to in Dubai was a sort of miracle worker. She was amazing, and I remember I kind of came out of that journey with that, and then I wanted to check in with her a couple of years later because I was, there's still a bit of hangover, whatever. There's this little thing I couldn't find her. I was slightly hot, but I was crestfallen. She sort of must have left the region. So I came back to London, and then I started. I see a therapist, less so for talking, more for sort of body work, but not just osteo stuff now. Occasionally for talking stuff through. But I think in terms of, I've processed and been through all of the sort of difficult things in my life to that regard, but I still do occasionally. I went to see a couple of sessions ago. I'd been offered a big job. I was very nervous about it. It was all energetic. What do I do? And we worked it out together, and she helped me tune into myself. And so I still call that therapy, yes. But no, in terms of kind of going back to talking about all the things that happened and this sort of stuff, I don't. Not so much anymore. I kind of that sort of being in the intensive care, as it were, is, I've kind of healed, and now I just go back every now and then and sort of check in when I need to. Or I write stuff down. If I'm having a really kind of wonky time about something, or I'm really stressed, or whatever it might be, I just sort of write it down. I tend to kind of write it either with a pen and paper, or I write it, depending on what it is, whether I want to look at it again or whether I just want to get it out. I'll write a sort of, a letter to myself, or a letter to the emotion, or a letter to the thing, and just sort of get it out of my head a bit, and it's down there. And I'll make sure I've got every kind of every nook and cranny of that sort of feeling, whatever it might be, the trigger, is it the person, is it the job, whatever it is. Get it all down, and then it's like it's not continually going around my head anymore.
Yeah, so I call it the baseline. It's like almost like rising you're rising your baseline, raising your baseline. Now you still have highs and lows in life, right? That's just life. You can't just live in this static forever. So it's now a case of when you get a high or a low, it's how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's how I navigate. It's just sort of you kind of live in trying to be present. The highs are great fun, and this will pass, and you're never stuck anywhere. I mean, one of the big sort of realizations I had when I was in those first years of real depression or real misery. I remember my first job, I was just like, I don't know what to do, and a very wise colleague said to me, which I use now, is that the clock never stops. So no matter how good or bad you're feeling, well, I usually mostly for the negative part. No matter how utterly shit you're feeling, you're always going through it. And so, you're not going to feel like this forever. The clock never stops. You feel like death now. You feel miserable. You're going to despair. Oh. But, that's going to pass. And the same way, sort of having an amazing, elated moment, a professional success, or, the high, if I climb mountains, there's a high of summiting a big peak in Nepal. And yeah, it's great. You think, oh, I'm top of the world. And you have that sort of glow for 2 weeks, whatever. And then it's like, oh shit! Well, I better get back to work. I've got to pay the rent. But there's all sort of go into the memory, and you kind of remember those things really. So, I think that you're always going through stuff is a valuable thing to remember. The good and the bad and the mediocre. It's always kind of coming up and down. So you're always on to the next one. But being present when in the more elated, enjoyable moments. I think really try and soak it all up and not get out your camera and try and film everything, all this sort of stuff. Actually just absorb it and try and make a real memory of it, because when you're kind of lying in bed at night and you do feel a bit bad, or you can look back and relive those moments, and that's again, it's just like reliving them and having the same sort of, oh yeah, that was so amazing. I think that generally sort of, certainly me anyway, keeps me sort of keeps my head above water.
No, it's nice. It's a nice full circle sort of episode, in the sense that you've gone through X, Y, and Z. You're in a position where you can build, but you can still feel, and you showcase all that, which is really good. And I just want to sort of tie it back up, which is obviously you and I are both men. So in your opinion, what do you see that's working really well in the men's space right now, or what are you hopeful for in the future, or what do you want to see more of in this space?
I think for now, it's the fact that these conversations are happening, that people that, you've got a great podcast going, Lewis, and, there's lots of others, which is great. And there are, I think, the more voices that join that conversation. I mean, there's, you think of this, I can think of 3 or 4 people that you see a lot. Professor Green being one, Foxy from the SAS, and a couple of the Roman Kemp, a few of the sort of the figureheads, let's call them. But I think the more non-TV, non-music star, people like you and I to a certain extent, people on the street, so to speak, the more voices that join that and give that different perspective that that is out there, which is one of the reasons I'm on this podcast and I'm talking to you guys. I think that's great. That's sort of the more proliferating that as far as possible. I think more for the future. I don't know. I think it's hard to say, really. I mean, every now and then there'll be a big documentary on on the terrestrial TV, or something that will say my journey with depression or my journey against this. But I think there has to be a sort of, example. Just springing into mind is the tragic case of Liam Payne, and in the media's role in that. I think the media have a big responsibility with changing the narrative and changing the narrative and increasing understanding and giving bandwidth and space, and from a non-critical, non-sensational, but actually benevolent manner in which to kind of raise the plight of men's mental health. I think it's all very well. As I said, you have these documentaries of BBC will do this, and they're very powerful, and they're good, and they're exciting, and they're influential, and you think, great, well, I'm glad he's talking about that. He looks like he's got everything. He's a millionaire sports star. How can he be depressed? All this sort of stuff. But I think that certainly the tabloid media and the media in general have a lot more work to do with that. And yes, there are big pockets of real positivity in there, real sort of ownership. People are talking about this, and that's great. But I think the more that sort of prevaricates and expands, to become more, to try and kill the stigma. And there's always going to be a stigma because men are always going to be men, but to be less biting when a man in a high profile position fails, whether that's the awful case of poor Liam and what happened in Argentina, or whether it's a man who's done something naughty at work, or he's really criminal's different. But if he's done something that the poor public opinion doesn't like, so that's kind of typically what the British media do, is build them up and then smash them down. And it's been like that for a long time. And I think that there needs to be a bit more understanding, awareness, a bit more sort of delicateness, I suppose, with that, which is a word that men, I'm not delicate, how are you talking fragile, what are you talking about? There is that natural sort of male ego, but I think that's a key part of it. That sort of knocking them up and building them up and knocking them down has to somehow change or soften, or just be a bit more, guys, people are dying here. It's just, people are taking their own lives. I think there's some great activations that happen. I know the Campaign Against Living Miserably, and giving them a shout out. They do some incredible activations. The last two they've done, of the last photo, which was down on the South Bank, the last photo of people who before they took their own lives. They were all smiling, having a great time at a party. And then the most recent one in Westfield with, the forgotten missed birthdays, when these teenagers, people in my, when I first got depressed, are taking their own lives. I think bringing that to life and the statistics around that, and really sort of, because, suicide is, still typically is a crime. People still talk about committing suicide. No, it's not. They've achieved it or whatever. That sort of, there is that stigma there, and that needs to sort of change. And the media at the heart of that, creating that, just changing the conversation.
I love that. Yeah, the Calm stuff is really good. They've done some amazing stuff. They've also done some really cool stuff in the men's space as well, which is nice to see, and is great. But those installations are really powerful for sure. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure. You are the reason that I do this podcast. It's a real story. It's a real man sharing his real thoughts, which is absolutely amazing. So I genuinely appreciate your time. I could talk to you for hours.
Sure.
But I will leave the final thoughts with you and allow people to tell you to people where to find you. So I'll leave it with you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Lewis, very much indeed. I've enjoyed this conversation hugely. You can find me professionally. I'm at Conway-Gordon. That's one word.com. I'm on Instagram, Tom Conway-Gordon. My Instagram handle's open. And then you've just put my name into Google. There are not many Tom Conway-Gordons around. You'll find me on LinkedIn there. So anyway, guys, I'm always open for any conversation. Feel free to, if this story, what we talked about, resonates with you, then drop me a note, ping me on DM, whatever it might be. Here for a conversation. Thank you very much indeed, Lewis.